What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of AGR's Pop Culture Reviews. You know, there are literally thousands and thousands of people who review video games within the YouTube community. Just like every other reviewer, we're all clamoring to get the latest and hottest titles to come out so that we can review them for the public. While all reviewers do a really great job giving their input, sometimes reviews can be a little sterile and don't really give games that they review the justice they deserve. Sure, any reviewer will go into great detail about graphics, frame rates, particle effects, and game mechanics in general. But I also think in that fervor to get a review out as soon as possible of the latest game, something's missing. Mostly what's missing in reviews is that undefinable and visceral experience you can get from playing a video game. That's why I think it's incredibly important to look back at a title, especially one that you didn't get to play the first time around or at launch. So today I want to introduce a segment that I've been wanting to do for some time, and that's the retrospective. Let's take a moment to look back at Killzone Shadowfall. Killzone has had a very interesting rise, and a dubious distinction at that. It's been known as the Halo killer, and that's something that's very difficult to live up to in first-person shooters. Let's take a moment to look at Metacritic. Overall users scored this title as a 6.8, not exactly stellar, more like lukewarm at best. But what was it? What was it that didn't resonate with audiences? Well, this is a little bit tricky, and is a combination of several factors. The first one is pretty obvious, and it has to do with the transition into the next-gen consoles. You see, the transition between the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 was a significant leap. The major factor, of course, is the introduction to HDMI. Essentially, for the first time in gaming history, we were able to see these images in the highest resolution possible at the time. Think of it like wearing glasses for the first time and staring at the Mona Lisa. Yeah, it was that big of a difference. This generation's cycle, however, was not that revolutionary, and probably incremental at best. Now, this point is debatable, of course, but what was touted as next generation really wasn't. What I mean is, there are some serious questions that need to be answered when the console that you've built struggles to run in 1080p and hit 60 frames per second. Now, I totally understand that game developers don't like to run their games at 60 frames per second because it takes away from the resolution. But in my opinion, if this was truly next gen, we wouldn't have to make those decisions against 60 frames or resolution. The other factor about Killzone is, of course, the hype. There was so much hype around this title at launch that I don't see how it could have ever lived up to the expectations of the fans. Okay, now that I've got that out of the way, let's talk about why I think Killzone was a really underrated title. First of all, I have to really applaud the motion capture here. It's extraordinary. I mean, when you look at somebody, especially when you're looking at them close up in the face, as in this segment here, they actually look like a human being. It really blew me away. In most cases, when you get really close to an AI in a video game, especially like this, really close, you see the pixels and it really detracts from the overall illusion. Killzone really mastered this technique, and it makes for a much more organic AI. The facial animations were really impressive, and it really kept me invested in the conversations that I was having. I also have to say that the voice acting is superb and syncs really well with the characters, even if the dialogue is a bit over the top and cliched at times. The gunplay in Killzone is also very good. While not the best I've ever had, it's still really fun. What I found pretty cool is some of the choices that they made for the destructible environments. Here, for example, the ship is set on a course to ram into the sun. If you decide, you can shoot at the internal shielding, letting in the light. When you do so, it changes your environment, and you can also use it to your advantage, as the light burns your enemies alive. I think that's a pretty nifty little trick, especially when you're being flanked on all sides by your enemies. Now for me, the most important thing about a game is how well the world is able to immerse me, and Killzone does that spectacularly. I really love the art style and the design of this world. Now, this story takes place some 300 years in the future, and yet it seems familiar. Many games will go out of their way to over-impress you and oversell their cutscenes. What I really liked about Killzone's cutscenes is that, similar to an art gallery, they allowed you to stroll, take your time, take in the beauty and really appreciate what's being presented to you without throwing so many flashy things in your face all at once. In this particular cutscene, there is a sense of mundane and ordinary, as if this is a normal thing to land on this helipad, and there's something very interesting about that. It's a much more compelling vision of the future, and I really liked it. Now, that's not to say that Killzone always gives you a moment to rest and reflect, because let me tell you, when shit hits the fan, man does shit hit the fan. And that's another incredibly impressive component about this game. I mean, you're gonna constantly get sucked into massive firefights. And I have to say, I didn't experience any performance issues, no drops in frame rate. I mean, look at everything that's going on here, and the frame rate was spot on. Enemy AI is also very impressive, and unlike other video games, they don't just stand in place and let you shoot them, they'll actually flank you, and if you're not careful, you can get surrounded very easily. The array of weapons at your disposal is also extremely varied. They range from the very familiar assault rifles and shotguns to otherworldly weapons that you get later on in the game. Interestingly, some weapons have multiple modes. And with these weapons, you'll be able to choose between close and long range on the fly. Very cool. Now, you don't take on these incredible odds by yourself. You also have an AI known as an owl. Essentially, your AI partner has 4 modes. Your owl is able to hack devices, generate a temporary shield barrier, shoot out a zip line, or attack enemies in general. What's really unique is that you can give commands to your owl through the touchpad on your PS4 controller, and it doesn't feel gimmicky. Actually, it feels very intuitive. Now, one other aspect of the gameplay that I feel I should mention is this really cool game mechanic, which is similar to bullet time. Granted, this kind of gunplay is not revolutionary, and it's actually been done before in many other series, principally Max Payne, but it's still really fun to do in this game, and I thought it was worth mentioning. Finally, the overall story in Killzone Shadowfall is actually pretty good. Essentially, after the events of the last game, the Helghath have been displaced, and were forced to reach what I would call an uneasy truce. What you learn early on in the game is that negotiations took place for the Helghath to take half of the planet. Basically, the only thing dividing the two factions is one giant wall. And yes, there is an obvious parallel to the geopolitical climate in the Middle East in our own world today. Now, this wouldn't be a modern first-person shooter without the multiplayer component. Now, I haven't spoken too much of it because by all accounts it was a really great experience. And strangely, and I'm not sure why they did this, but multiplayer runs in 1080p and 60 frames per second, unlike the campaign. Now, for obvious reasons, I understand why they went with 60 frames on the multiplayer, but I wish they would have extended that to the campaign. I would love to have experienced this game in 60 FPS. What a shame. Overall, this title was an amazing experience for me, and in many ways, I'm really glad that I didn't play this game at launch. So for those of you who never played the game or weren't really interested because of some of the reviews that you read, you have no excuses now. Right now, you can get this game at GameStop for only $9.99. I'm actually a member of the GameStop rewards, so I actually got it for less than $8. Alright, so that's my official retrospective on Killzone Shadowfall. As always, I thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next AGR's Pop Culture Reviews.